Why, hello and welcome. And today, as I promised, we are doing Gulliver's Travels. Now, Gulliver's Travels was the second video that I presented on the channel, or the third. No, it was the third. We did Tristram Shandy as the second after our introduction. And I'm not taking that video down, but I did want to have another look at Gulliver, having had more of a look at Swift. So that is why we are having a second bite out of Gulliver's Travels. But before we start, remember, if you want to support us, there is our shop where we have books and writing services. If you also like our designs, you can go across to our Redbubble shop where there are over 100 different designs. You can check those out. If you would like to support us but don't want to spend any money, that's fine. Please like, subscribe, share the videos and comment. Always love seeing people's comments. Love when people share their thoughts with us. So that is how you can support us. So, Gulliver's Travels. Now, this took me ages to get. Now, you would think it's Gulliver's Travels. It is probably the most well-known book from the 18th century. It's certainly the most well-known Swift. Why on earth did it take weeks and weeks and weeks to get a copy of Gulliver's Travels? Well, because I wanted a copy of Gulliver's Travels that had the notes in the back, that had the annotation. Finding a copy that is annotated, not so easy. Which, yeah, is kind of something I'd actually like to talk about, because while I was looking for a copy of Gulliver, and I thought, oh, easy, I'll just go online, it'll be easy to find. I had to special order this. I couldn't believe I'm having to special order an Oxford World Classic because nobody had it in stock. What they had in stock and what I didn't want were children's editions. I was really genuinely surprised by how many editions that they had that were aimed at children. And you could tell that they were aimed at children. And how could I tell they were aimed at children? I judged a book by its cover. But they really were. They were not annotated. And because they were aimed at children, there was no way that you were going to be getting pure Swift. You were going to be getting something quite bowdlerized. And that made me start to think, how did this book, this biting satire of George I's England, become a children's book? Well, it turns out I did a bit of digging around and there hasn't been a lot written about this. But it turns out that the path from biting political satire to benign children's story began quite quickly. An edition was put out in Swift's lifetime that was shortened. They had managed to basically hack half the book out. A lot of the satirical, like strongly satirical pieces or obviously satirical pieces, plus some of the sexual things. This book has an awful lot of scatological humour and sexual humour in it. Got hived out of the book as being not appropriate for children. The scatological humour was generally left in, but a lot of the sexual stuff was taken out quite early on. by the 19th century, the scatological stuff was coming out as well. But children's books didn't really exist. This became, in the 18th century, there were simplified versions, and then by the 19th century, in the 19th century, we all know our thoughts about the 19th century. Boring prudes. They really hollowed out the book of its bite and turned it more or less into a children's story, a fantasy, a fairy tale of far-off lands, and thus Gulliver lost his bite. Gulliver was also has been quite frequently filmed. There's a silent film of Gulliver. There is a 1939 animation of Gulliver's Travels. There is a TV series that I remember watching with Ted Danson as Gulliver. There is the one with Jack Black as Gulliver. There are a lot of filmed versions of Gulliver's Travels. In particular, the Lilliput is the part that most of those absolutely love. I think the playing with perspective and being able to use models appeal to cinema, movie makers. So it's quite that playing with size, I think, was one of the big ones, because that was probably the easiest thing for early filmmakers to manage compared to something like The Flying Island. Bit hard. Talking horses. Well, we've all seen Mr. Ed. It was pretty low tech in that. But it has appealed in that way. You can see the visual appeal of Gulliver in why it became a popular thing to film. But this isn't a children's book, and I had to wait ages to get my copy of Gulliver because I didn't want the children's book. I wanted the biting 18th century satire. Now, in my last video, I talked about how it's a satire of the novel. I'm not going to talk about that again because I'm leaving that video up. But I would like to talk about how satire is, well, it's very important. Its context is very important, because I knew without the notes I would be entirely lost in how this is satirical. You don't really need the notes to understand how A Modest Proposal is satirical. It's like, clearly he's talking about eating babies, farming and eating babies. This is pretty obvious that there's a satirical intent in this. Something like the Wynnums wanting to exterminate the Yahoos, or discussing the extermination of the Yahoos, clearly is satirical and really reflects Swift's misanthropic concept of the world. But things that are less obviously satirical, things that you need cultural context to properly, fully understand, are things like the fact that the emperor of Lilliput is George I. That the Lilliputians are small because they are reflecting the bad government and corruption of the Europe that Gulliver has left, that he has come from. They are a reflection of what Swift sees as the negative, this very combative reign. He is like Pope. Swift was not a fan of the Hanover dynasty. He was not a fan of the Georges, George I. He was not a fan of the Whig government. He was a Tory. And he was certainly not a fan of the Whig government's wars. So he satirizes this in Lilliput. These are small men with bad government. which is contrasted when he goes to the land of the Broderbingen, the giant people, where they are peaceful, they are isolationist, and the emperor of Broderbingen is a Jacobin. He has a Jacobin reply to every one of Gulliver's Georgian riposts. So he and the Broderbingens are a more utopian society. They are good, wholesome. They are huge because of this. Because they stick to their little part of the world and they cultivate that well, rather than as the Lilliputians do, constantly, frenetically attack others around them. So this is something that is very political. It's very particular to Swift's own context. Now, the Laputans, or the whores, if we would call them that, with their Italianate speak and focus on science, are a satire on London life, and in particular the Royal Academy. They are both a satire of the fad for Italian opera. Handel was brought to England by George I as court composer. He was the early part of his career, he was writing Italian operas for the English stage. But once the fad for Italian operas faded, he wrote English oratorios. In fact, most people would probably be more familiar with his English oratorios than they would be of his Italian operas. I actually particularly like Handel's Italian operas. They are more obscure. If you say Handel, to most people, they would think water music or the Handel's the Messiah, or Zadok the priest. So one of the things from the oratorios. Our intro music is actually Handel. It's from Giulio Cesare in Egitto, which is probably my favourite piece of Handel, his big Egyptian Roman opera. And my favourite production is the Glyndebourne production with which was David McVicar, and is very Empire. It's very, very fun. Beautiful production. But the Laputians are satirizing this imported art form, the Italian opera. It's also satirizing the Royal Academy, which Swift did not really like. Especially Isaac Newton. He has quite a few jabs at Isaac Newton in this. And so, again, this is not a story of flights of fantasy. This is very grounded, and for his audience, they would completely have understood exactly who this was having a go at. And this is part of the problem of satire. Satire, now, being an Australian, we love satire. We love satire. It's something we really get. It's satire is very dry humor. It really can link in with the gallows humor that works very much across Australian culture, but it's also something that is very context specific. Now, it also dates. It dates, and it can become even something that's not that old. This is 300 years old, or nearly 300 years old. 30 years, 33 years ago. If there was a piece, a Clark and Daw piece. Now, if you know this, all I need to say is the front fell off. Well, the front fell off. And that was a satirical piece. That it was from Clark and Daw when they would do little political sketches, political satire, very, very popular. Little at the end of a current affairs program that they were on. I think the front fell off was quite an old one. It was when they were on a commercial station, and then they moved to the ABC and were doing it on the 7:30 report, and then they had a little standalone series of like 5-minute sketches. And these across the political divide, across everywhere. There are some very funny ones with Tony Abbott as head boy, but the front fell off. The front fell off. I will link it below. If you know, you know. And the front fell off has actually, it's so funny. The front fell off has actually just seeped into lexicon for Australians. It's like tell them you're dreaming, or it's the vibe. I use some of these, and I'm sure I confuse the hell out of people because these are very, very context specific. But that's one of the issues with satire. That piece is funny. It's very, very funny. It's about a ship accident where 20,000 litres of crude leaked out and caught on fire off the coast of Western Australia. But Clark and Daw do it so well. It's such potent satire. And it's very, very funny. But it's dated now. You have to know it. The other great one that they did was the games, about the Sydney Olympic Games. How long's a 100-metre track? 98 metres. That's one of the things of satire. You end up being able to talk in code to people who also understand what you're talking about. That's what Swift is doing in this. He is talking in code to people who also know what he's talking about. And they will find it funny because he is talking to sympathetic people. But if you don't know the code, you won't notice it. It'll go straight over your head. Now, good satire has a large audience and it's topical. This has obviously lost its context. It has been decontextualized. It has meaning, and I talked in my previous video about the kind of meaning that you can give it having been decontextualized, but it is a biting satire. And the cover of this is actually George III looking at Napoleon as a Broadbingen emperor looking at Gulliver, which just goes to show how quickly this is from, the cover of this is from 1803. And it goes to show how quickly this story saturated, but also how quickly it lost its context. Because this book that has George III regarding Napoleon is savaging his grandfather, George I. So the savage power of the satire diminishes rapidly, unbelievably fast. Now, that means this book has sort of a double life. It is both a fantastic satirical fantasy, but it's also, if you read it with the notes in the back, which I do advise you to get a copy with the notes in the back so that you know what it's talking about and who it's making look stupid and who it's admiring. It tells you a lot about politics and the political allegiances of people of that time and what were their concerns and what what were they angry about? What did they... Because satire generally comes out of anger. It comes out of, that's unbelievable. So what were people having issues with? What were they interested in? What brought people to the table? What were they talking about? And Gulliver's Travels does provide us with evidence of this. And we can definitely see exactly where Swift nailed his colours to the mast politically. Much like Pope, he was more fond of Queen Anne and the position that Queen Anne's court allowed, and he was a Tory, not a Whig. The Tory party was in fact almost entirely abolished or outlawed under the Georgians. They had Whig governments only. So you have a book, a satirical book by a man who is politically isolated and is, you know, using what he has to engage in the conversation. And what he has is a satirical novel. It is a novel that is both contemporary political satire. It is also contemporary satire of the novel. It is a satire of Daniel Defoe. It is a book that is extraordinarily inventive. Although this is not an entirely unprecedented concept of fantasy, the idea of the tiny people and the giant people and the flying city. There are actual other writers who have done this before Swift. He is not creating a genre. He is tapping into a pre-existing genre. You get hints of things like, of classical things. When the Broadbingan wades into the water after the men flee, leaving Gulliver on the island, it is like when the Cyclops, the blinded Cyclops, wades into the water attempting to reclaim Odysseus and his sailors. There are various different bits that are not just constructed from the contemporary world, but they also come from the classical world, because Swift, like Pope, that is where culture is, not in these newfangled novels. You're not creating a culture out of this new thing. You might satirize them, you might play with them, but you're not actually going to give up your classical roots. And that is something that you also see in this, which, to be fair, you see in a lot of 18th century writing. Just because somebody is writing the newfangled novel with the new kind of man didn't mean that they gave up using classical allusions entirely. That it doesn't happen, though. To be honest, Daniel Defoe really doesn't. He is the modern mercantile man, and if it doesn't make money, it has no value. Which, for someone like Swift, you can see why he would hate that. Because Moll Flanders really has no classical allusions. Of course, Moll Flanders is Moll Flanders, so she's not really the person to do classical allusions as a narrator. So there is that element for Defoe. But Gulliver's Travels is laughing with knives. It is satire, but the satire doesn't work unless you understand what he's satirizing. It isn't for kids. You know, Bowdlerized versions, yeah, okay, but it's not really a kid's book. It has descended into that, which does make a difficulty, but if you want the sharp-toothed, bawdy, scatological Gulliver's Travels, get one like this, uncut, with notes. And you will enjoy this story a lot more. The more you understand about Swift and his world, the more this book works as satire. So if you are interested in diving into early Georgian England and early Georgian politics, then this book gets a different life and a different perspective. So I would suggest that you do look at it in that way. Look at it as part of Swift's body of work, not just an isolated piece. A lot of his dislike of people comes through, but also the fact that, you know, no matter how extreme he does, you have to remember this is a man who advocated cannibalism in jest, but he still advocated cannibalism. So nothing is really terribly outside of his willingness to play with. He really doesn't seem to suggest that there's anything that's too out of bounds. He will go. He likes the shock value. He really does like the shock value, and he wants you to think. He wants you to think. The strength of a writer like Swift is the fact that you can read it in multiple ways. That it is a multifaceted text. But it's not a benign children's story. It is a satirical work. Satirical works do need to be handled carefully because they're spiky. And it is an important thing to remember. And that's why this thing has lasted 300 years. Not just because we enjoy the multiple perspectives. And I have another copy of it that has a brilliant cover that covers both the Lilliputians and the Broadbingans. The idea of perspective with the shoes on the islands. This one doesn't have notes in it, so we, again, couldn't really use this. This one does have, however, Pope's Gulliver poems, which I may do an audio recording and put those out with this video. But this one has it is, I like this because of the idea of the perspective. The cover of this is really quite good, but you want, if you're reading it, get one like this. This isn't a cut text, but it's a text without notes. It's a book you need notes with. It's like Ulysses. Try reading Ulysses without the notes. I dare you. There are just some where you need the notes. So, Gulliver's Travels. I read this, I did the video for this in 2020. I'm doing a video for it again in 2024, 4 years later. Absolutely, highly recommend. Go out and read Gulliver. Enjoy some Georgian satire. And next time I come here, I will be bringing you Alexander Pope's The Dunciad, which is what we would have done had Gulliver not turned up. So next time we're going to stay again in Georgian England, and we're going to have a look at Alexander Pope's The Dunciad. So until then, farewell. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.